I'm Sarah Chen, and I should have known something was wrong when my mother insisted on giving a speech at my wedding reception. In 28 years, she'd never volunteered to speak publicly about me. Not at graduations, not at birthdays, not even when I received the Teacher of the Year award last spring. But there she stood, champagne flute raised, demanding attention at what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. What happened next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to make a choice that would change our relationships forever. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my wedding dawned gray and drizzly, which my sister Isabella immediately declared was bad luck. She burst into my bridal suite at the Riverside Manor without knocking, her perfectly styled blonde hair already camera-ready despite it being barely 7 in the morning. "Sarah, this weather is a disaster," she announced, clicking across the hardwood floor in designer heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "How are we supposed to get decent photos with this gloom? Maybe you should consider postponing." I looked up from where I sat, having my makeup done, catching my reflection in the ornate mirror. My dark hair was still in rollers, and Maria, my makeup artist, was carefully applying foundation to even out my complexion. The gray light filtering through the tall windows actually created a romantic, ethereal atmosphere that I found rather beautiful. "Good morning to you too, Isabella," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "The weather will be fine. The ceremony isn't until 4, and even if it rains, we have the covered pavilion." Isabella waved dismissively, settling herself into the velvet armchair by the window. At 25, she had always been the family princess, with her striking blue eyes, model-height figure, and an uncanny ability to make every situation about herself. Today was apparently no exception. "I suppose it could work," she mused, pulling out her phone to check her reflection in the camera. Though I did bring 3 different dress options because I wasn't sure which would photograph better. The emerald green Valentino, the navy Oscar de la Renta, or the blush pink Marchesa. I blinked at her through the mirror. "Isabella, we discussed this months ago." The bridesmaids are wearing dusty rose, and I specifically asked family members to avoid anything too attention-grabbing. "Oh, those were just suggestions, right?" She laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Besides, someone should look elegant in the photos. We can't all wear off-the-rack dresses." The sting of her comment hit deeper than I cared to admit. My wedding dress had indeed come from a bridal boutique sale rack, a beautiful but budget-friendly choice that fit my teacher's salary. I'd been proud of finding something so lovely within my means, but Isabella had a gift for making my practical choices sound like failures. Maria caught my eye in the mirror and gave me an encouraging smile. She'd been doing weddings for 15 years and had probably seen every family dynamic imaginable. Her presence was oddly comforting as I tried to navigate my sister's morning mood. "Your dress is absolutely stunning," Maria said firmly, gesturing toward the gown hanging by the window. "That lace detail is exquisite, and it's going to look incredible on you." She was right. My dress was beautiful, a classic A-line with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that made me feel like a fairy tale princess. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I'd tried it on, and David's reaction when he'd accidentally glimpsed it during pickup had confirmed it was perfect. "Thank you, Maria," I said gratefully. "I love it too." Isabella glanced over at the dress with a critical eye. "It's very suitable," she said, which in Isabella speak meant disappointingly ordinary. "I'm sure David will think it's nice." Before I could respond, my mother swept into the room carrying a garment bag and wearing an expression of barely contained stress. Patricia Chen had been planning this wedding with military precision for the past 8 months, treating it like a campaign to prove to our extended family and her social circle that she could throw an event worthy of the family name. "Sarah, darling, you look lovely," she said, though her attention was already shifting to Isabella. "Bella, sweetheart, I brought the Chanel suit as an alternative. The navy would complement Sarah's color scheme beautifully." I watched in the mirror as my mother unzipped the garment bag to reveal an elegant navy suit that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. The favoritism wasn't even subtle anymore. "Oh, Mom, that's perfect," Isabella gushed, standing to examine the outfit. "Much better than what I brought. You always know exactly what works." "Well, we want the photos to be perfect," Mom said, smoothing the jacket's lapels. "The photographer is supposed to be excellent, and these pictures will be in our family albums forever." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. This was how it had always been in our family. Isabella was the star, the one whose appearance and comfort mattered most, while I was expected to be grateful for whatever attention remained. Even on my wedding day, I was somehow secondary to my sister's wardrobe concerns. "The photos will be beautiful regardless," I said, though I wasn't sure why I bothered. "This is about David and me celebrating our marriage, not a fashion shoot." My mother's laugh was light but dismissive. "Of course, dear, but presentation matters. You want to look back on these photos with pride, don't you? We all want to look our best." The implication was clear. My best required their intervention and oversight. I caught Maria's eye again in the mirror, and she gave me another encouraging smile while continuing to work on my makeup with professional efficiency. "Mrs. Chen," Maria interjected diplomatically, "Sarah has beautiful bone structure and such expressive eyes. She's going to be absolutely radiant in the photos." I felt a rush of gratitude toward this woman I'd met only an hour ago. It was strange how a stranger's professional kindness could feel more supportive than my own family's presence. "Oh, certainly," Mom agreed absently, already focused on hanging up Isabella's outfit. "Sarah has always been wholesome looking." Wholesome! Another word that sounded complimentary, but carried the undertone of ordinary, unremarkable, safe. I'd been hearing variations of it my entire life. Isabella was stunning, glamorous, striking. I was wholesome, sweet, nice. "I think I'll go check on the flowers," I announced, needing a moment away from the dynamic that was already threatening to overshadow my morning. "Make sure everything's set up properly in the ceremony space." "Oh, don't worry about that," Mom said quickly. "I've already handled all those details. You just focus on getting ready. Besides, you don't want to risk getting dirty or messing up your hair." The message was clear. I wasn't trusted to handle even the simplest tasks on my own wedding day. Instead, I was supposed to sit quietly and be prepared while others managed the important decisions. Isabella was now holding the Chanel suit up against herself in front of the full-length mirror, admiring how the navy fabric complemented her fair complexion. "This is gorgeous, Mom. You have such incredible taste." "I thought it would be perfect for the photos," Mom replied, beaming at Isabella's approval. "Especially for the family portraits. We want everything to look coordinated." I wondered if anyone had considered whether the bride might want input on how the family portraits should look, but I'd learned long ago that questioning my mother's plans was futile. She'd made up her mind, and opposition would only create unnecessary drama. "Sarah, let's talk about your bouquet toss," Isabella said suddenly, turning away from the mirror. "I've been thinking I should probably stand in the back. I mean, I wouldn't want to catch it and make things awkward." The comment was classic Isabella, managing to sound considerate while actually drawing attention to herself. Everyone knew she'd been dating Marcus for 3 years, and speculation about their engagement had been a constant topic of family conversation. By mentioning the bouquet toss, she was really highlighting her own romantic status and the family's expectations about her future. "You should stand wherever feels comfortable," I said diplomatically, though I was beginning to feel like a supporting character in my own wedding story. "Well, we certainly don't want any accidents," Mom chimed in. "Though it would be wonderful if Marcus finally decided to propose soon."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Isabella's not getting any younger, and her options won't last forever. I felt my jaw clench. My sister was 25 and had a master's degree in marketing from Northwestern, but somehow her primary value was still measured by her ability to secure a marriage proposal. The fact that this conversation was happening during my wedding preparations was both ironic and deeply frustrating. "Marcus has been looking at rings," Isabella said with studied casualness, the kind of tone that suggested she'd been waiting for an opportunity to share this information. "His friend Jason mentioned seeing him at Tiffany last weekend." "Oh, how exciting!" Mom exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Did Jason say anything specific? What kind of setting was he looking at?" I watched this exchange in the mirror, feeling increasingly invisible as my mother and sister dissected Marcus's supposed ring shopping while Maria continued working on my eye makeup. This was my wedding morning. But they were discussing Isabella's anticipated engagement with far more enthusiasm than they'd shown for my actual wedding planning. Apparently he was very focused on the princess-cut diamonds, Isabella continued, clearly enjoying the attention. And Jason said he seemed to know exactly what he wanted, which suggests he's been planning this for a while. "I always knew that boy was serious about you," Mom said proudly. "He comes from such a good family, and his father's law firm is so well established. You two will make a beautiful couple." The phrase hit me like a small slap. Beautiful couple. Not once during my 8-month engagement had my mother described David and me as a beautiful couple. We were a nice couple, a sweet couple, a good match. David was dependable, kind, stable, all positive qualities that somehow sounded lukewarm when compared to the glowing terms reserved for Isabella's relationships. "Maria, could you make my eyes a bit more dramatic?" I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the request. "I want them to really stand out in the photos." "Absolutely," Maria replied warmly. "You have gorgeous eyes. Let's make them pop." Isabella glanced over with mild interest. "Are you sure? You don't usually wear much makeup. You don't want to look overdone." There it was again, the gentle undermining disguised as sisterly concern. Isabella had perfected this technique over the years, offering advice that sounded helpful, but actually reinforced my supposed limitations and encouraged me to play it safe. "I think a little drama would be perfect," I said firmly. "It's my wedding day. I want to feel beautiful." "Of course you'll feel beautiful," Mom said absently while checking her phone. "You always look nice, Sarah. Nice, sweet, wholesome." The trilogy of faint praise that had followed me through life, like a well-meaning but limiting mantra. I was beginning to understand why I'd always felt like I was living in soft focus, while Isabella existed in high definition. Maria seemed to sense my frustration and leaned closer as she applied eyeshadow. "You know what?" she said quietly. "Just for me. I've done makeup for a lot of brides, and the most beautiful ones are always the ones who know their own worth. Confidence is the best accessory." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear, and I felt some of my tension ease. She was right. This was my day, and I deserved to feel beautiful and celebrated, regardless of my family's dynamics. "Thank you," I whispered back. "That means a lot." Isabella had moved on to discussing potential honeymoon destinations for her hypothetical engagement, while Mom offered suggestions based on places she thought would photograph well for social media. Their conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, present but not particularly relevant to their primary concerns. "Sarah, you're being awfully quiet," Isabella observed suddenly. "Are you nervous? You look a little tense." "I'm fine," I replied automatically, though the truth was more complicated. I wasn't nervous about marrying David. I was completely certain about that decision. What bothered me was feeling like a guest at my own wedding preparation, watching my family treat this morning as an opportunity to focus on Isabella's future, rather than celebrating my present. "Wedding day jitters are totally normal," Isabella continued, with the authority of someone who'd never been married. "Just remember to smile for the photos. You sometimes forget to smile when you're concentrating." Another piece of helpful advice that managed to point out a supposed flaw while seeming supportive. I caught myself wondering when Isabella had become such an expert on my facial expressions, and whether she'd always been this subtly critical, or if I was just noticing it more clearly now. "I'll remember to smile," I said evenly, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Mom finished hanging up the Chanel suit and turned her attention back to us. "Girls, I want you both to know how proud I am today. Sarah, you've chosen such a stable, reliable man in David. And Isabella, watching you blossom into such an accomplished young woman has been incredible. You both reflect so well on our family." The compliments were genuine but telling in their differences. David was stable and reliable, qualities that suggested safety rather than passion. Isabella was accomplished and beautiful, words that suggested achievement and admiration. Once again, I was defined by my practical choices while my sister was celebrated for her potential. "Thank you, Mom," I said, because responding with anything else would create the kind of scene that would overshadow the day entirely. Isabella beamed at the praise, as she always did. She'd grown up bathed in admiration and encouragement, told repeatedly that she was special, that great things were expected of her, that the world was full of opportunities waiting for someone with her gifts. I'd grown up being told I was doing fine, that I should be satisfied with my choices, that contentment was an admirable goal. "I should go check on the catering setup," Mom announced, glancing at her watch. "The flowers should be arriving soon, and I want to make sure everything's perfect. Isabella, when you're dressed, could you help me with the place cards? Your handwriting is so much neater than mine." "Of course," Isabella agreed readily. She'd always been Mom's preferred assistant for anything requiring taste or presentation, while I was typically assigned tasks that were more functional than aesthetic. After they left, Maria and I worked in comfortable silence for a while. She was incredibly skilled, and I watched my reflection transform as she enhanced my features with subtle artistry. The dramatic eye makeup made my brown eyes look mysterious and striking, while carefully applied contouring brought out cheekbones I'd never noticed before. "You're gorgeous," Maria said finally, stepping back to admire her work. "Absolutely stunning." Looking at myself in the mirror, I felt a jolt of surprise. The woman looking back at me was sophisticated and elegant, with an understated beauty that didn't need to shout for attention. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely beautiful rather than merely acceptable. "Wow," I breathed, touching my face gently. "I can't believe that's me." "That's all you," Maria assured me. "I just enhanced what was already there. You have classic beauty, Sarah, the kind that ages well and looks elegant in every photo." Her words carried a warmth and authenticity that felt different from the careful compliments I usually received. There was no underlying comparison, no subtle suggestion that I should be grateful for whatever attractiveness I possessed. Just honest appreciation for how I looked. "Thank you," I said, meaning it completely. "You've made me feel like a real bride." "You are a real bride," she replied with a laugh. "And you're going to have a beautiful wedding." As she began packing up her supplies, I allowed myself a few moments to simply look at my reflection and appreciate what I saw. The woman in the mirror looked confident and radiant, ready to walk down the aisle and marry the man she loved. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and David's best man, James, peered around the door with his eyes carefully covered. "Sarah? Is it safe to look?" David sent me to deliver something, but I promised not to peek at the bride. I laughed, the first genuinely happy sound I'd made all morning. "You can look, James. I'm still in my robe." He opened his eyes and immediately broke into a wide grin. "Wow, you look amazing! David's going to lose his mind when he sees you." "Thank you," I said, feeling a warm glow at his enthusiasm. "What did he send?" James handed me a small wrapped box tied with a simple white ribbon. "He wanted you to have this before the ceremony. Said it was something to remind you how much he loves you." My heart fluttered as I untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a book. I recognized it immediately as a reference to how we'd met in the library where I worked part-time during graduate school. David had been researching environmental law, and I'd helped him find obscure legal texts week after week until he finally worked up the courage to ask me for coffee. "He had it engraved," James added, pointing to tiny script on the back of the charm. I flipped it over and read the inscription. "Every love story is beautiful, but ours is my favorite. D." Tears pricked at my eyes, and I had to blink carefully to avoid smudging Maria's beautiful work. This was exactly the kind of thoughtful, personal gesture that made David so perfect for me. He understood what mattered to me, what would make me smile, what would remind me of our unique connection. "Tell him I love it," I said to James, fastening the bracelet around my wrist. "And tell him I can't wait to marry him." "Will do," James replied with a grin. "See you at the altar, Mrs. Morrison." Mrs. Morrison. In a few hours, that would officially be my name. Sarah Morrison, wife of David Morrison, partner in a marriage built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my family's dynamics, none of that changed the fundamental truth that I was marrying my best friend and the love of my life. After James left, I sat quietly for a few minutes, touching the charm on my bracelet and thinking about David. He was probably getting ready in his suite down the hall, surrounded by his groomsmen who were likely telling jokes and keeping the mood light. David's family had always been warm and welcoming to me, treating me like a daughter from the moment we'd gotten serious. His parents, Ruth and Michael, were both retired teachers who lived in a cozy house filled with books and photo albums, documenting family adventures. They'd raised David and his younger brother with the kind of steady affection and encouragement that built confidence without arrogance. When David had brought me home for the first time, Ruth had hugged me like I was already family, and Michael had spent the evening asking thoughtful questions about my work and interests. The contrast with my own family dynamics was stark. Where the Morrisons celebrated each other's achievements without competition, the Chens seemed to operate under the assumption that praise was a limited resource that had to be carefully rationed. Where David's family made everyone feel valued and heard, mine had a clear hierarchy of importance that rarely shifted. But today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be about love and commitment and starting a new chapter. I was determined to focus on the joy of marrying David, rather than the familiar frustrations of family politics. A gentle knock on the door interrupted my thoughts, and my maid of honor, Jessica, peeked in with a bright smile. "How's our beautiful bride doing?" she asked, stepping into the room with her arms full of bridesmaid dresses. Jessica had been my best friend since college, and her presence immediately lifted my spirits. She was one of those people who genuinely celebrated others' happiness without any hidden agenda or competitive edge. When I'd gotten engaged, she'd cried happy tears and immediately started planning the perfect bachelorette party. When I'd worried about budget constraints for the wedding, she'd helped me find creative solutions without making me feel embarrassed about my limitations. "I feel amazing," I said, and realized I actually meant it. Despite the morning's family drama, looking at myself in Maria's expert makeup and thinking about David's sweet gift had restored my excitement about the day. "You look incredible," Jessica said, studying my face with admiration. "That makeup is absolutely perfect. You look like yourself, but elevated." "That's exactly how I hope to feel," I replied gratefully. "How are things going downstairs?" "Everything's beautiful," Jessica assured me, beginning to unpack the bridesmaid dresses. "The flowers are gorgeous, the string quartet sounds amazing, and the catering staff has everything under control. Your mom really did an incredible job coordinating everything." I felt a stab of gratitude toward my mother, despite our morning tensions. She had worked tirelessly to make this wedding beautiful, and whatever her motivations, the result was going to be lovely. "That's wonderful," I said. "I should probably start getting dressed soon." "The other bridesmaids are getting ready in the next room," Jessica explained. "Emma and Kate are already in their dresses, and they look fantastic. The dusty rose color is perfect on everyone." Emma and Kate were friends from teaching, colleagues who'd become close friends over shared lunch duties and late-night grading sessions. They'd been so excited to be included in the wedding party, and their enthusiasm had been infectious during dress shopping and planning. "I can't wait to see everyone," I said honestly. "It's going to be wonderful having you all there." Jessica began steaming the bridesmaid dresses while we chatted about the ceremony timeline and last-minute details. Her calm efficiency was exactly what I needed, and I felt my earlier stress beginning to fade as we focused on practical preparations. "Sarah," Jessica said suddenly, hanging up the last dress, "I hope you know how happy I am for you. You and David are perfect together, and you deserve all the joy in the world." Her words were simple but heartfelt, and they meant more to me than elaborate compliments or expensive gifts. This was what unconditional support looked like, what genuine friendship felt like. Someone who celebrated your happiness without reservation or comparison. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means everything to me." "Now," Jessica said with mock seriousness, "let's get you into that gorgeous dress and make David the luckiest man in the world." As I stood to begin getting dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was confident and radiant, ready to embrace whatever the day would bring. Whatever family drama might unfold, whatever unexpected moments might arise, I was marrying the man I loved, surrounded by people who cared about us. The wedding dress felt even more beautiful than I remembered as Jessica helped me step into it. The lace was delicate and romantic, the fit was perfect, and the way it moved as I walked made me feel graceful and elegant. This was how a bride should feel on her wedding day: beautiful, confident, and completely certain about the choice she was making. "Oh my goodness," Jessica breathed as she finished buttoning the back of the dress. "Sarah, you look like a fairy tale princess." I turned to look in the full-length mirror and felt my breath catch. The dress was perfect, absolutely perfect. The lace sleeves were elegant and romantic, the fitted bodice was flattering without being revealing, and the flowing skirt created a silhouette that was both classic and timeless. "I feel like a princess," I admitted with a laugh. "Is that silly?" "Not at all," Jessica replied firmly. "You should feel like royalty on your wedding day. You look absolutely stunning." As she began arranging my veil, I thought about all the moments that had led to this one. Meeting David in the library, our first awkward coffee date, the night he'd told me he loved me, while we were walking through the park near campus, the morning he'd proposed over breakfast in our tiny apartment kitchen. Each memory was precious and specific, part of a love story that belonged entirely to us. "I think I'm ready," I announced, smoothing my skirt and checking my reflection one final time. "You're more than ready," Jessica agreed. "You're perfect." A knock on the door signaled that it was time for photos, and I felt a flutter of excitement as Jessica opened it to reveal my father standing in the hallway in his formal black suit. Robert Chen had always been a quiet, steady presence in our family, often overshadowed by my mother's more dramatic personality but consistently supportive in his understated way. "Sarah," he said softly, his eyes misting slightly as he took in my appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you, Dad," I replied, feeling emotional at the genuine warmth in his voice. "Are you ready for some photos?" he asked, offering me his arm. "The photographer wants to get some shots of us before the ceremony." As we walked toward the main staircase where the photographer was waiting, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. This was my wedding day, and despite whatever complications might arise, it was going to be beautiful. I was marrying a man who loved me completely, surrounded by friends who supported me genuinely, and wearing a dress that made me feel like the best version of myself. The photographer, a friendly woman named Carol, had set up an elegant backdrop near the manor's grand staircase. The natural light filtering through tall windows created a romantic atmosphere, and she worked efficiently to capture formal portraits of me with my father, with Jessica, and with the other bridesmaids who had joined us looking lovely in their dusty rose dresses. "These are going to be gorgeous," Carol assured me as she adjusted her camera settings. "You're such a natural in front of the camera, Sarah." Very elegant and graceful. I felt a warm glow at her compliment, especially since photography had always made me feel awkward and self-conscious. But today felt different. Today I felt confident and beautiful, worthy of being the center of attention for all the right reasons. As we moved through various poses and groupings, I found myself genuinely enjoying the process. My bridesmaids were laughing and chatting, my father was beaming with pride, and Jessica was making sure every detail of my dress and veil looked perfect in each shot. "Let's get some shots with your mother and sister," Carol suggested, and I saw Mom and Isabella approaching from across the room. Mom looked elegant in her navy dress, though I noticed she'd chosen something slightly more formal than what we'd discussed during planning. Isabella was stunning in the Chanel suit, which fit her perfectly and photographed beautifully against the neutral backdrop. "Oh, Sarah, you look lovely," Mom said, though her attention immediately shifted to adjusting Isabella's posture and checking that the suit jacket was hanging properly. "Thank you," I replied, trying not to feel deflated by her distracted response. Carol efficiently directed us through a series of family portraits, and I tried to focus on the positive aspects of the moment. Whatever their flaws, these were my family members, and these photos would be treasured memories of my wedding day. Beautiful, Carol said as she captured a shot of the 3 generations of Chen women together. This is going to be a lovely addition to your album. As we finished the family photos, I noticed Isabella checking her phone and smiling at whatever message she'd received. Her whole demeanor seemed to brighten, and she whispered something to Mom that made them both look excited. "Everything okay?" I asked, curious about their sudden energy shift. "Oh, just some good news," Isabella replied vaguely. "Nothing that can't wait until after your ceremony." The evasive answer bothered me slightly, but I decided not to push. Whatever was happening could be addressed later. Right now, I wanted to focus on getting married. "Shall we head to the ceremony space?" Jessica suggested, glancing at her watch. "The guests should be arriving soon." As we made our way toward the pavilion where the ceremony would take place, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness building in my chest. In less than an hour, I would be walking down the aisle toward David, ready to promise him my heart and my future. The ceremony space looked absolutely magical. White chairs were arranged in neat rows facing an archway decorated with white roses and greenery. String lights had been woven through the overhead canopy, creating a romantic ambiance that would be perfect as the afternoon light faded. Carol was already positioning herself to capture the processional, and the string quartet was tuning their instruments. "It's perfect," I breathed, taking in all the details that my mother had coordinated so beautifully. "She really did an amazing job," Jessica agreed, squeezing my hand supportively. As guests began arriving and taking their seats, I felt the reality of the moment settling in. This was actually happening. In a few minutes, I would be married to David, beginning our life together as husband and wife. From my position in the bridal suite, I could see people filing into the ceremony space through the window. David's parents arrived looking elegant and happy, followed by various aunts, uncles, and family friends. My teaching colleagues had dressed up beautifully for the occasion, and I felt a warm rush of gratitude for their presence. "I think it's time," Jessica announced softly, checking her watch. "Are you ready, Mrs. Morrison?" I took a deep breath, touched the charm on David's bracelet for luck, and smiled at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me was confident and radiant, ready to marry the love of her life. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it completely. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed it would be. Walking down the aisle on my father's arm, I felt like I was floating. The string quartet played our chosen processional beautifully, and every face I passed was beaming with joy and love. But nothing compared to the moment I saw David waiting for me at the altar. He looked absolutely handsome in his charcoal gray suit, but it was his expression that took my breath away. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and his smile was so wide and genuine that I felt my own eyes well up in response. This was the man I was about to marry, my best friend and the love of my life, and the pure happiness on his face made every stress of the morning melt away completely. When my father placed my hand in David's, I felt a sense of completeness that was almost overwhelming. The officiant, Pastor Williams from David's childhood church, spoke beautifully about love, commitment, and the sacred nature of marriage. David and I had written our own vows, and when it came time to recite them, I was amazed by how steady my voice sounded despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "Sarah," David began, his voice strong and clear. "From the moment you helped me find that obscure legal text in the library, I knew you were someone special. You've taught me that love isn't just about finding someone who makes you happy, but finding someone who makes you want to be a better person every single day. You are my anchor, my adventure, and my home, all at once. I promise to support your dreams, to laugh with you through all of life's joys, to hold you through its challenges, and to love you with everything I have for all the days of my life." By the time he finished, I was crying openly, not caring about my makeup or how I looked in the photos. His words were perfect, heartfelt, and completely authentic to who we were as a couple. When it was my turn, I looked into his eyes and felt every word come straight from my heart. "David, you saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when I doubted myself. And you loved me exactly as I am while inspiring me to become who I'm meant to be. You are my safe harbor, and my greatest adventure, my best friend, and my deepest love. I promise to stand beside you as your partner in all things, to cheer you on in your successes, to comfort you in difficulties, and to choose you every day for the rest of our lives." The ceremony concluded with the most perfect kiss of my life, and as Pastor Williams announced us as husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in applause and cheers. David and I practically floated back down the aisle together, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The cocktail hour was a blur of congratulations, hugs, and joyful conversations. David's family surrounded us with warmth and excitement, and my teaching colleagues were genuinely thrilled to celebrate with us. Even my own family seemed caught up in the happiness of the moment, with my father giving David a hearty handshake and welcome to the family. My mother had been in full hostess mode, making sure every detail was perfect and every guest was attended to. She looked beautiful and elegant, and I felt a surge of gratitude for all the work she'd put into making this day special. Whatever our complicated dynamics, she had created something truly magical. Isabella had been charming and social throughout the cocktail hour, working the room with the kind of natural grace that made everyone feel special. She looked stunning in the Chanel suit, and I had to admit that my mother's choice had been perfect for the photos. Several guests had complimented how lovely she looked, and she'd accepted the praise graciously while making sure to redirect attention back to David and me. As we moved into the reception space for dinner, I was amazed by how beautiful everything looked. The tables were set with elegant linens, beautiful centerpieces of white roses and greenery, and soft candlelight that created a romantic atmosphere. My mother had truly outdone herself with every detail, from the carefully planned menu to the perfectly coordinated decorations. David and I were seated at the head table with our wedding party, and I felt surrounded by love and support. Jessica was radiant in her maid of honor dress, keeping me laughing with funny stories, and making sure I actually ate some dinner despite my excitement. James, David's best man, was entertaining the table with tales from their college days, and the other groomsmen and bridesmaids were all getting along beautifully. The speeches began after the main course, and James stood first to toast David. His words were funny and heartfelt, sharing stories about David's loyalty as a friend and his obvious devotion to me from the moment we'd started dating. "I've never seen David as happy as he's been since Sarah came into his life," James concluded, raising his glass. "Here's to many decades of laughter, love, and the kind of partnership that makes the rest of us believe in true love." The applause was warm and genuine, and I squeezed David's hand as he stood to acknowledge his best man's words. James had spoken with such sincerity and affection that I felt grateful all over again for the kind of people David surrounded himself with. Jessica's maid of honor speech was next, and she stood with obvious emotion to address the room. "I've had the privilege of being Sarah's best friend for over 6 years," she began. "And in all that time, I've watched her give so much of herself to everyone around her. She's the teacher who stays late to help struggling students, the friend who remembers every important detail of your life, the daughter who always puts family first. But when she met David, I watched her discover what it felt like to have someone put her first for a change." Her words hit me deeply, and I felt tears prick at my eyes again. Jessica had seen so much of my life, including the times when I'd felt overlooked or undervalued, and her recognition of how David had changed that dynamic meant the world to me. "David," Jessica continued, turning to my new husband, "thank you for seeing how special Sarah is and for loving her the way she deserves to be loved. And Sarah, watching you bloom in this relationship has been one of the greatest joys of my friendship with you. You both deserve every happiness." The applause was even warmer this time, and I stood to hug Jessica tightly, whispering my thanks in her ear. Her speech had been perfect, capturing exactly what our friendship meant to me and what David's love had brought to my life. As Jessica sat down, I noticed my mother standing and reaching for a microphone. My heart did a little skip of surprise, since we hadn't discussed her giving a speech. In fact, she'd specifically declined when I'd asked months ago, saying she preferred to let the wedding party handle the formal toasts. "Excuse me, everyone," Mom said, her voice carrying clearly through the reception space. "I know this isn't on the program, but I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment." The room quieted, and all attention turned to my mother. She looked poised and elegant in her navy dress, every inch the gracious hostess. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach, unsure what she planned to say, but hoping it would be something warm and supportive. First, I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate Sarah and David's marriage, she began smoothly. Your presence means so much to our family, and seeing all these faces here tonight fills my heart with joy. I relaxed slightly at her warm tone and genuine smile. This was going well, and I felt grateful that she'd decided to speak after all. As Sarah's mother, I've had the privilege of watching her grow into the wonderful woman she is today. She's always been our steady, reliable daughter, the one we could count on to make sensible choices and build a stable, happy life. The words were complimentary, but something about the phrasing made me feel slightly uneasy. Steady and reliable were good qualities, but they felt like faint praise compared to the more effusive language typically used in wedding speeches. David, we're so pleased to welcome you into our family, Mom continued, turning to smile at my new husband. You're clearly a good man with strong values, and we know you'll take excellent care of our Sarah. Again, the sentiment was nice, but the language felt oddly formal and detached. I caught David's eye and saw a flicker of confusion cross his face. This didn't sound like the warm, emotional mother of the bride speech we'd both been expecting. But tonight isn't just about celebrating one beautiful milestone, Mom said, her voice taking on a slightly different quality that made my stomach clench with apprehension. It's also about celebrating the wonderful things that lie ahead for our entire family. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in her tone and the slight emphasis on entire family made me deeply uneasy. Beside me, Jessica had gone very still, and I could sense her tension even without looking at her. Which is why I'm absolutely thrilled to share some other exciting news with all of you tonight, Mom continued, her smile growing brighter as she turned toward Isabella's table. Isabella, sweetheart, would you please stand up? My sister rose gracefully from her seat, and I noticed that Marcus was standing with her, his face flushed with excitement and nervousness. My heart began to pound as I realized what was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Mom announced with obvious delight, I'm absolutely thrilled to share that Marcus proposed to Isabella this afternoon, and she said yes. We're going to have another wedding to plan. The room erupted in surprised gasps and applause, and I felt the world tilt sideways around me. Isabella was beaming and holding up her left hand to show off a large diamond ring that sparkled brilliantly in the candlelight. Marcus looked proud and relieved, accepting congratulations from nearby guests with obvious happiness. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what had just happened. My mother had just announced my sister's engagement at my wedding reception. In front of all my guests, during what was supposed to be my moment, she had shifted the spotlight to Isabella and her big news. David's hand found mine under the table and squeezed tightly. I could feel his shock and anger radiating through his touch, though his face remained carefully neutral for the benefit of our guests. Jessica leaned closer to me, whispering urgently in my ear. Sarah, are you okay? Do you want me to do something? I couldn't answer because I couldn't find my voice. The applause continued around us as guests turned to congratulate Isabella and Marcus, and I watched in numb disbelief as my wedding reception transformed into an engagement celebration. Isabella, come up here and show everyone that gorgeous ring, Mom called out, beckoning my sister toward the head table. Isabella glided forward with practiced grace, her face glowing with happiness and excitement. She looked absolutely radiant, and the diamond on her finger was indeed spectacular, clearly expensive, and perfectly suited to her elegant hand. Marcus picked it out all by himself, Isabella announced to the crowd, her voice carrying easily through the room. 3 carats, Princess Cut, from Tiffany. He proposed this afternoon in the garden outside, right before the ceremony. The timing was so romantic. More applause and excited chatter filled the room. I noticed several guests pulling out their phones to take pictures of Isabella and her ring, the same phones that had been capturing moments from my wedding just minutes before. How wonderful that both my daughters are so blessed in love, Mom continued, clearly basking in the attention and excitement. First, Sarah finds her stable, dependable David, And now Isabella has found her Prince Charming in Marcus. What more could a mother ask for? The comparison hit me like a physical blow. David was stable and dependable, while Marcus was Prince Charming. Once again, my relationship was characterized by practical virtues, while Isabella's was painted in romantic fairy tale terms. I felt a familiar burning sensation in my chest, the same feeling I'd experienced countless times throughout my life when Isabella's achievements or milestones overshadowed my own. But this was different. This was my wedding day, supposed to be the one day when I was the center of attention, when my happiness was the primary focus. "Sarah, isn't this exciting?" Isabella called out to me, her voice bright with genuine enthusiasm. "We can plan our weddings together." Though, of course, Marcus and I are thinking about a destination wedding, maybe Tuscany or the French countryside. Something really romantic and unique. The implication was clear. Her wedding would be sophisticated and adventurous, while mine was presumably ordinary and local. I managed to nod and force a smile, though I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my own body. "Oh, how wonderful!" Several guests exclaimed, and I watched as the conversation naturally shifted toward Isabella's wedding plans. Where would they go? When would it happen? How had Marcus planned the proposal? David leaned close to my ear and whispered, "This is unbelievable. Do you want to leave? We can make an excuse and go." Part of me wanted to take him up on that offer, to escape this situation before it got any worse. But another part of me, the part that had spent 28 years accommodating my family's dynamics, felt obligated to stay and play my role as the gracious sister and daughter. "I can't leave my own wedding reception," I whispered back, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Then what do you want to do?" David asked gently. "Because I'm about 2 seconds away from standing up and reminding everyone whose wedding this actually is." His protective instinct warmed my heart, even through my shock and hurt. David was prepared to defend me and our special day, even if it meant creating a scene with my family. But I knew that confronting this situation publicly would only make things worse and create lasting damage to family relationships. "Let's just get through it," I murmured, squeezing his hand gratefully. "We can talk about it later." Isabella was now circulating through the room with Marcus, showing off her ring and accepting congratulations from guests. I watched as people who had come to celebrate my marriage were drawn into excitement about her engagement. The conversation at every table had shifted to the new development, and I felt like a spectator at my own wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, clearly following my mother's cues. "Let's have Isabella and Marcus join the happy couple on the dance floor for a special celebration dance." I felt my heart sink even further. The first dance was supposed to be a private moment for David and me, a chance to hold each other close and savor our first moments as a married couple. Now it was being turned into a group celebration that included my sister's engagement. "Absolutely not," David said firmly, standing from his chair. "I'm sorry, but the first dance is for the bride and groom only. It's tradition." His polite but firm words carried clearly, and I saw my mother's face falter slightly. But Isabella jumped in smoothly, her social skills allowing her to navigate the awkward moment with apparent grace. "Of course. How silly of me," she laughed, though I caught a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "The first dance is absolutely sacred. Marcus and I will wait our turn." David helped me up from my chair, and we walked onto the dance floor together as the opening notes of our chosen song began to play. "At Last" by Etta James had always been special to us, and as David pulled me into his arms, I tried to focus on the lyrics and the feeling of being held by my new husband. But even during our first dance, I could see guests at the edge of the dance floor showing each other photos of Isabella's ring on their phones. Several were already posting on social media, and I caught glimpses of captions that mentioned both the wedding and the engagement as if they were equally important events. "Ignore them," David whispered in my ear as we swayed together. "This is our moment, our song, our marriage. Nothing else matters." I tried to take his advice and lose myself in the music, and the feeling of dancing with my husband for the first time. David was a good dancer, and he held me close enough that I could rest my head against his shoulder and pretend for a few minutes that we were the only people in the room. But when the song ended and applause filled the space, I heard someone call out, "Now let's see the ring again," and watched as attention immediately shifted back to Isabella, who was happy to oblige with another display of her engagement ring. The rest of the reception continued in a similar vein. Every traditional wedding moment seemed to be overshadowed or shared with celebration of Isabella's engagement. When it came time to cut the cake, my mother suggested that Isabella and Marcus join us for photos, since they're the next happy couple. When I tossed my bouquet, the conversation immediately turned to whether Isabella would catch it, and when she deliberately stepped back, the discussion became about how she no longer needed to, since she already had her ring. I found myself going through the motions of my own wedding reception while feeling increasingly disconnected from the celebration. Guests were polite and congratulatory toward David and me, but the energy and excitement in the room clearly centered around Isabella's unexpected engagement announcement. "This is insane," Jessica whispered to me during a quiet moment when she came to check on me. "I can't believe your mother announced Isabella's engagement at your wedding." "That's like wedding etiquette rule number 1. Don't overshadow the bride." "I know," I replied quietly, though part of me wasn't entirely surprised. This was exactly the kind of thing that happened in my family. Isabella's milestones always seemed to eclipse mine, and my mother's attention naturally gravitated toward whatever Isabella was doing. "What are you going to do?" Jessica asked, her expression fierce with protective anger on my behalf. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "What can I do? It's already happened. Making a scene now will just make everything worse." Jessica looked like she wanted to argue, but she was interrupted by my Aunt Margaret approaching with obvious excitement. "Sarah, dear, congratulations on your beautiful wedding," Aunt Margaret gushed. "And how exciting about Isabella's engagement. 2 brides in the family. Your mother must be over the moon." "Thank you," I managed, though the words felt automatic and hollow. "Isabella's ring is absolutely stunning," Aunt Margaret continued. "Marcus must have spent a fortune. 3 carats from Tiffany. And the way he proposed in the garden today was so romantic. She's such a lucky girl." I nodded and smiled, playing my expected role as the supportive older sister, but inside I felt like I was shrinking smaller and smaller. Even my own relatives were more excited about Isabella's engagement than about my actual wedding. As the evening wore on, I noticed that the wedding gifts table had become a gathering spot where guests were discussing Isabella's wedding plans, along with examining the presents David and I had received. Someone had apparently started a conversation about destination wedding locations, and several guests were offering suggestions for romantic venues in Europe. "Tuscany would be absolutely magical," I heard my mother saying to a group of relatives. "Isabella has such exquisite taste, and Marcus's family has the resources to really do something spectacular." The implication that my wedding was not spectacular stung, even though I knew my mother probably hadn't intended it that way. But the constant comparisons, subtle and overt, were wearing me down. David appeared at my side, handsome and concerned. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. This is really hard." "I know," he replied, wrapping his arm around me protectively. "I'm so sorry this is happening. Your family is being incredibly thoughtless." His validation of my feelings was comforting, but it also made me feel guilty for being upset. Shouldn't I be happy for my sister? Shouldn't I be gracious and supportive instead of feeling hurt and overshadowed? "I should be more generous," I said, voicing my internal conflict. "Isabella's engagement is good news. I should be celebrating with her." "Sarah," David said firmly, turning to face me directly, "it's your wedding day. Your sister getting engaged today and your mother announcing it during your reception is incredibly poor timing and worse judgment. You have every right to feel upset about this." Before I could respond, Isabella appeared beside us with Marcus, both of them glowing with happiness and champagne. "Sarah!" "David!" Isabella exclaimed, throwing her arms around both of us in an enthusiastic hug. "Thank you so much for letting us share this incredible day with you. It's like fate that Marcus proposed today, isn't it? We'll always share this anniversary of love." The idea that my wedding anniversary would now be forever linked with her engagement made my stomach clench. but I managed to return her hug and smile appropriately. "Congratulations," I said, and meant it despite my complicated feelings. "I'm happy for you both." "We're thinking about having the wedding next spring," Isabella continued excitedly. "Something outdoors, maybe in Italy or France. Marcus's uncle owns a vineyard in Tuscany that could be absolutely perfect." "That sounds beautiful," David replied politely, though I could hear the tension in his voice. "Oh, it will be," Isabella agreed. "We want something really unique and memorable. Not that your wedding isn't lovely," she added quickly, "but you know how I've always dreamed of something more dramatic." There it was again, the subtle implication that my choices were nice but ordinary, while hers would be extraordinary. I felt David's hand tighten on my waist, and I knew he'd caught the slight as well. "Well, we should let you get back to your guests," Marcus interjected diplomatically, perhaps sensing the tension that Isabella seemed oblivious to. "Thank you again for such a beautiful celebration." As they moved away, I watched Isabella immediately gravitate toward another group of guests to share her news and show off her ring. Her energy was infectious, and I could see people lighting up as she approached, drawn to her excitement and natural charisma. "I think I need some air," I said to David, feeling suddenly claustrophobic in the reception space that had been transformed from my wedding celebration into something I barely recognized. We slipped out onto the terrace where the cocktail hour had been held, now empty and quiet under the evening stars. The contrast with the bustling reception inside was striking, and I felt some of my tension ease in the peaceful silence. "This is better," David said, pulling me close as we stood looking out over the gardens. "Just us." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "This isn't how our wedding was supposed to go." "Hey," David replied, tilting my chin up to meet his eyes. "Look at me. We got married today. You're my wife, and I'm your husband. That's what matters. That's the only thing that matters." His words were exactly what I needed to hear, and I felt tears prick at my eyes for what felt like the 100th time that day. But these were different tears, born of gratitude and love rather than hurt and frustration. "I love you," I whispered, standing on my toes to kiss him softly. "I love you too," he replied against my lips. "And tomorrow, we're going to wake up married and start our honeymoon, and none of this family drama will matter anymore." He was right, of course. In the grand scheme of our life together, this one evening wouldn't define our marriage or diminish what we meant to each other. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my family dynamics, something that would be hard to come back from. "Should we go back in?" I asked reluctantly, knowing we couldn't hide on the terrace all evening. "If you want to," David replied. "But if you want to make an Irish exit and head to our suite, I'm completely on board with that too." The idea was tempting, but I knew disappearing from my own reception would create even more drama and hurt feelings. Whatever my family's faults, they had come to celebrate with us, and I owed it to our other guests to finish the evening gracefully. "Let's go back," I decided. "But maybe we can wrap things up a bit early." "Whatever you want," David agreed, offering me his arm as we walked back toward the reception. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversations, forced smiles, and growing exhaustion. I danced with my father, who seemed genuinely oblivious to the tension surrounding Isabella's announcement. I chatted with David's relatives, who were warm and lovely but clearly confused by the evening's unusual dynamic. I accepted congratulations from my teaching colleagues, who were polite about Isabella's engagement but obviously felt the timing was inappropriate. As the reception finally began winding down, I found myself standing near the gift table, watching guests say their goodbyes. Many stopped to offer congratulations to both couples, treating the evening as a double celebration despite the fact that only one of us had actually gotten married. "Sarah, dear," my mother approached with a tired but satisfied expression. "What a wonderful evening. Everything went perfectly." I stared at her, genuinely unsure if she was being deliberately obtuse or if she truly didn't understand what had happened. "Mom," I said carefully, "you announced Isabella's engagement during my wedding reception." "Oh, I know," she replied with a bright smile. "Wasn't that wonderful? What perfect timing. 2 such happy occasions on the same day." "But it was my wedding day," I continued, trying to keep my voice level. My one wedding day. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. Well, yes, of course. But Isabella was so excited, and the timing just seemed so magical. I thought you'd be thrilled to share such a special day with your sister. I would have been thrilled to hear about it tomorrow, I replied quietly. Or next week. But today was supposed to be about David and me. My mother's expression shifted to one of mild irritation, the look she always got when she felt her judgment was being questioned. Sarah, you're being very selfish, she said, her voice taking on a reproachful tone. Isabella's happiness doesn't diminish your own. A generous sister would be celebrating this wonderful news. The accusation of selfishness hit me like a slap. After a lifetime of putting my family's needs before my own, of being the accommodating daughter who never complained or made waves, being called selfish for wanting my wedding day to remain focused on my wedding felt deeply unfair. I am happy for Isabella, I said, my voice beginning to shake with emotion. But I'm also hurt that my wedding reception became about her engagement. You're overreacting, Mom replied dismissively. Everyone had a wonderful time, and both my daughters are blessed with love. That's what matters. Before I could respond, David appeared at my side, having clearly overheard at least part of our conversation. Mrs. Chen, he said politely but firmly, I think what Sarah is trying to say is that while we're both thrilled about Isabella's engagement, the timing of the announcement was difficult for us. Oh, David, Mom replied with a patronizing smile. You're such a sweet, sensitive man. But surely you understand that family celebrates together. This just makes the day even more special. I watched David's jaw clench as he processed being dismissed as overly sensitive for supporting his new wife's feelings. His usual patience and diplomacy were clearly being tested. I think we're going to call it a night, he said evenly. It's been a long day, and we have an early flight tomorrow. Of course, Mom agreed readily. You two lovebirds need your rest. And don't worry about any of the cleanup. Isabella and I will handle everything. The easy assumption that Isabella would help with post-wedding responsibilities while I was dismissed to go rest felt like another small slight, but I was too emotionally exhausted to address it. Thank you, I said quietly, accepting my mother's perfunctory hug goodbye. As David and I made our way toward the exit, we were intercepted by Isabella and Marcus, both still glowing with excitement and champagne. Leaving already? Isabella asked with genuine surprise. The night is still young? We're pretty tired, David replied diplomatically. It's been a big day. Oh, of course, Isabella exclaimed, her face immediately showing concern. I'm sorry. I forgot you two are the ones who actually got married today. All this engagement excitement has me completely scattered. It was the first acknowledgement anyone in my family had made that there might be something inappropriate about the evening's focus, and I felt a small wave of relief that Isabella at least recognized the situation. Congratulations again, I said, hugging my sister goodbye. I really am happy for you. Thank you, Isabella replied, squeezing me tightly. And thank you for sharing your special day with us. It means the world to me. As we finally escaped to the quiet of the hotel corridor, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in hours. David wrapped his arm around me as we walked toward our honeymoon suite, and I leaned into his warmth gratefully. Well, he said with a wry smile, that was definitely a wedding we'll never forget. I'm so sorry, I said again, feeling responsible for my family's behavior. I had no idea this would happen. Sarah, stop apologizing, David said firmly, stopping in the hallway to face me. You have nothing to be sorry for. Your family's behavior tonight was inappropriate, and you handled it with more grace than they deserved. I just keep thinking I should have done something differently, I admitted. Maybe I should have spoken up more, or asked my mother to save the announcement for another time. You shouldn't have had to, David replied. Any reasonable person would know not to announce someone else's engagement at a wedding. The fact that your mother thought this was appropriate says something about her judgment, not yours. We reached our suite, and David unlocked the door to reveal a beautiful room decorated with rose petals and champagne waiting on ice. The hotel staff had clearly put effort into making our wedding night special, and I felt a pang of gratitude for their thoughtfulness. "This is beautiful," I said, taking in the romantic touches that made the space feel magical. "It is," David agreed, but he was looking at me rather than the room decorations. "And so are you. You were the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, and I'm the luckiest man in the world." His words, spoken with such sincerity and love, finally began to penetrate the fog of hurt and confusion that had surrounded me all evening. This was my husband, the man who had chosen to build a life with me, who saw my worth even when my own family seemed to overlook it. "I love you," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "I love you too," he replied, pulling me into his arms. "And tomorrow we're going to Hawaii, where it will just be us and the ocean, and no family drama for 10 whole days." The reminder of our upcoming honeymoon lifted my spirits considerably. We'd planned a trip to Maui, where we would spend our time hiking, snorkeling, and simply enjoying each other's company away from all outside pressures and expectations. "That sounds perfect," I said, finally beginning to relax for the first time all day. As we prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on the strange duality of the day. My wedding ceremony had been absolutely perfect, filled with love and joy, and the promise of a beautiful future with David. But the reception had been complicated and hurtful, in ways I was still processing. "David," I said as we settled into bed together, "do you think I'm being too sensitive about tonight?" "Not at all," he replied immediately. "If anything, I think you've been too accommodating. Your family took advantage of your generous nature tonight." "I just don't want to be the kind of person who can't share the spotlight," I continued, voicing my deepest fear. "I don't want to be petty or jealous." "Sarah," David said gently, turning to face me in the dim light, "wanting your wedding day to be about your wedding is not petty or jealous. It's completely normal and reasonable. The fact that you're even questioning yourself shows how kind and selfless you are." His words were comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this evening had revealed something fundamental about my place in my family that I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. No matter what I achieved or how special an occasion might be for me, there would always be a part of my family that saw my role as supporting and celebrating others rather than being celebrated myself. "I think I understand something about my family now that I didn't want to see before," I said quietly. "What's that?" David asked, his voice gentle and encouraging. "I think I've always been the supporting character in their story," I admitted. "Even today. On my wedding day, I somehow became part of the supporting cast for Isabella's engagement story." David was quiet for a moment, and I could sense him choosing his words carefully. "I've noticed that dynamic," he said finally, "and I think you deserve better than that. You deserve to be the main character in your own life." His observation hit me with unexpected force. I had spent so much of my life accommodating others, making space for their achievements and celebrations, that I'd somehow forgotten I deserved to be prioritized too. "Tomorrow we start our new life together," David continued, reaching for my hand in the darkness. "And in our life you'll never be a supporting character. You'll always be my leading lady." As I drifted off to sleep in my husband's arms, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for the relationship with my family that might never be what I wished it could be, but determination to build a life where I was valued and celebrated for who I truly was. The last thought I had before sleep claimed me was that perhaps this painful evening had been a gift in disguise, showing me clearly what I needed to understand about my family dynamics and my own worth. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the protagonist of my own story. Our honeymoon in Maui was exactly what I needed to heal from the disappointment of our wedding reception. For 10 blissful days, David and I explored the island, swam in crystal clear waters, and talked for hours about our dreams and plans for the future. Away from my family's complicated dynamics, I felt like myself again, confident and valued and deeply loved. But all good things must come to an end, and eventually we had to return to real life. David went back to his environmental law practice, and I returned to my 5th grade classroom at Oakwood Elementary. My students were excited to hear about the wedding and honeymoon, and their genuine enthusiasm helped me focus on the positive aspects of our celebration rather than dwelling on the painful parts. For the first few weeks after our return, my family maintained a respectful distance. Isabella sent a lovely thank you note for being included in the wedding festivities. My mother called once to ask how the honeymoon had gone, and my father checked in via text to make sure we'd settled back into our routine. The space felt healthy and necessary, giving me time to process what had happened and figure out how I wanted to handle our relationships going forward. David and I moved into our new apartment together, a charming two-bedroom place near the university where David worked. We spent our evenings unpacking wedding gifts, arranging furniture, and creating a home that reflected both of our personalities. It was during this domestic bliss that I discovered the full extent of how our wedding had been perceived by others. Jessica came over one evening to help me organize our kitchen, bringing takeout Thai food and a bottle of wine to celebrate our new living space. As we arranged dishes and glasses in our cabinets, she brought up something that had been bothering her since the wedding. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about your wedding reception," she said carefully, clearly having thought about how to approach the topic. "I've been going back and forth about whether to say anything, but I think you deserve to know how other people reacted to what happened." I set down the stack of plates I'd been holding and gave her my full attention. "What do you mean?" "Well, after you and David left that night, I stayed to help with some of the cleanup," Jessica explained. "And I overheard a lot of conversations among your guests. People were pretty shocked by your mother's announcement and the way the evening played out." My stomach clenched with a familiar anxiety. I'd been hoping that maybe the situation hadn't been as obvious to others as it had felt to me, that perhaps I'd been overly sensitive about the whole thing. "What were people saying?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. "Most of your teaching colleagues were appalled," Jessica said gently. "Mrs. Henderson actually said it was the most inappropriate thing she'd ever seen at a wedding. And several of David's family members were asking me if that kind of thing was normal in your family." The embarrassment was overwhelming. Not only had my wedding been hijacked, but it had been witnessed by professional colleagues and my new in-laws, all of whom would forever associate my marriage with poor family dynamics and inappropriate behavior. "David's cousin Amy asked me if your sister always steals the spotlight like that," Jessica continued reluctantly. "And your great-aunt Rose was telling people she couldn't believe your mother would do such a thing. She kept saying, 'In my day, you would never dream of upstaging a bride.'" I sank onto one of our new bar stools, feeling the weight of public humiliation settling on my shoulders. It was one thing to be hurt by my family's behavior, but knowing that others had witnessed and judged the situation made everything feel so much worse. "I'm sorry," Jessica said quickly, seeing my distressed expression. "I probably shouldn't have told you all that. I just thought you should know that it wasn't in your head. And it wasn't normal. People noticed, and they thought it was wrong." "No, I'm glad you told me," I said, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. I keep second-guessing myself and wondering if I was being too sensitive. At least, now I know my reaction was justified. "More than justified," Jessica said firmly. "Sarah, what your family did was objectively inappropriate. There's actual wedding etiquette about this stuff, and they violated pretty much all of it." As if to prove her point, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and saw Isabella's name, accompanied by a photo of what appeared to be wedding venue options in Italy. "Looking at some amazing possibilities for next spring." The message read, "Thought you might want to see since you know about planning weddings now. Aren't these gorgeous?" The casual assumption that I would want to be involved in planning her wedding, combined with the subtle suggestion that my experience planning one wedding made me somehow qualified to help with her much more elaborate celebration, rankled in a way that surprised me with its intensity. "What is it?" Jessica asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the message and photos. "Isabella wants my input on wedding venues in Tuscany." Jessica stared at the phone screen and then at me with undisguised disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. She announced her engagement at your wedding reception, and now she wants you to help plan her destination wedding?" "Apparently," I said, setting the phone aside without responding to the message. "Are you going to help her?" Jessica asked. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Part of me feels like I should. She's my sister, and normally I would be excited to help with something like this. But part of me is still so hurt about what happened that I don't know if I can be genuinely supportive right now." "You don't owe her anything," Jessica said bluntly. especially not after what she did. And asking you to help plan her wedding when she ruined yours is pretty tone-deaf, even for Isabella." Her words were validating, but they also highlighted a painful reality I was still coming to terms with. My family seemed completely oblivious to how their actions had affected me, which meant they were likely to continue making similar assumptions and demands. Over the next few days, I received several more messages from Isabella with wedding planning updates and requests for opinions. She wanted my thoughts on flowers, on dress styles, on whether a spring or fall wedding would be more romantic. Each message felt like a small weight added to a growing pile of resentment. David noticed my increasing tension and finally asked me about it one evening as we sat on our small balcony sharing a bottle of wine. "You've been really quiet lately," he observed gently. "Is everything okay?" I showed him the string of messages from Isabella, watching his expression grow more incredulous with each screenshot. "She's asking you to help plan her wedding?" he said finally. "The wedding that's happening because she got engaged at our wedding?" "Yep," I confirmed, taking a larger sip of wine than was probably wise. "And how do you feel about that?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Frustrated," I admitted, "and confused, and guilty for being frustrated, which makes me even more frustrated." David set down his wine glass and turned to face me fully. "Sarah, you don't have to help plan her wedding. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." "But she's my sister," I protested, voicing the internal conflict that had been plaguing me. "And this is what family does. We support each other." "Family also doesn't announce their engagement at your wedding reception," David pointed out. "Support should go both ways." His observation was accurate but difficult to accept. I'd spent so many years being the supportive sister, the one who celebrated Isabella's achievements and helped with her projects, that stepping back from that role felt foreign and uncomfortable. "I don't know how to not help her," I said quietly. "It's like, who am I if I'm not the sister who's always there for her?" "You're the sister who deserves to have boundaries," David replied firmly. "The sister who gets to prioritize her own emotional well-being. The sister who doesn't have to smile and play along when she's been hurt." That conversation marked a turning point for me. I realized that I'd been so conditioned to accommodate my family's needs and expectations that I'd never really considered what I needed or wanted from those relationships. The idea of setting boundaries felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. I decided to test the waters by not responding to Isabella's wedding planning messages for a few days. The silence felt strange at first, like I was shirking some essential responsibility. But as the days passed without any apparent consequences, I began to appreciate the mental space that came with not being constantly consulted about someone else's major life decisions. My mother, however, was less willing to let my withdrawal go unnoticed. She called me on a Thursday evening, ostensibly to chat about how David and I were settling into married life, but the conversation quickly turned to Isabella's wedding plans. "Isabella mentioned that you haven't been responding to her messages about the wedding," Mom said with the carefully neutral tone she used when she was fishing for information. "She's a little hurt that you're not more involved in the planning process." "I've been busy getting settled into our new place," I replied, which was technically true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "Of course, dear, but this is such an exciting time for Isabella," Mom continued. "She really values your opinion, and she was hoping you could help her narrow down venue options. You did such a nice job with your own wedding planning." The compliment felt backhanded, suggesting that my wedding planning skills were adequate for basic events but perhaps not sophisticated enough for Isabella's grander vision. More frustrating was the implication that I should be flattered by Isabella's request for help and eager to contribute to her celebration. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I said, surprising myself with my directness. "Do you understand why I might be feeling conflicted about Isabella's wedding planning right now?" There was a pause that lasted just long enough to be uncomfortable. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean that she announced her engagement at my wedding reception," I said clearly. "And that turned what was supposed to be our celebration into something focused on her news." "Oh, Sarah," Mom said with a sigh that suggested I was being unnecessarily dramatic. "You're not still upset about that, are you? It was such a magical coincidence that they got engaged the same day." Most people would see that as a blessing. Most people would see it as inappropriate, I countered, feeling my frustration rising. Jessica told me that our guests were shocked by what happened. Jessica doesn't understand family dynamics the way we do, Mom replied dismissively. She's an only child, so she doesn't know how siblings share important moments. The suggestion that my hurt feelings were the result of not understanding proper sibling relationships was particularly galling. I'd spent my entire life sharing important moments with Isabella, usually by stepping aside so she could shine brighter. Mom, it was my wedding day, I said, my voice beginning to shake with emotion. My one wedding day. And it became about Isabella's engagement. You're being very selfish, Sarah, Mom said, her tone turning sharp with disapproval. Isabella's happiness doesn't take away from your own. A loving sister would be celebrating this wonderful time in Isabella's life instead of making it about her own hurt feelings. The accusation of selfishness hit me exactly where it was designed to hurt most. I'd been called selfish so rarely in my life that the word carried extra weight, especially coming from my mother in response to my expressing hurt about my own wedding. I have to go, I said abruptly, not trusting myself to continue the conversation without saying something I might regret. Sarah, don't hang up angry, Mom pleaded. We're family. We need to work through these kinds of misunderstandings. There's no misunderstanding, I replied quietly. I understand perfectly. I ended the call and sat in the silence of our living room, feeling shaky and upset, but also strangely relieved. For the first time in my adult life, I'd clearly articulated my feelings to my mother instead of swallowing them to keep the peace. The result had been painful but oddly empowering. David found me there an hour later, still sitting in the same spot and staring out the window. How are you doing? He asked gently, settling beside me on the couch. I told my mother how I felt about what happened at our wedding, I said without preamble. How did that go? David asked, though his expression suggested he could guess. She told me I was being selfish, I replied, my voice flat with exhaustion. David's jaw tightened, and I could see him fighting to control his own anger at my family's continued dismissal of my feelings. You're not selfish, he said firmly. You're the least selfish person I know. The fact that you're even questioning whether you have a right to be upset shows how generous and accommodating you've always been. I feel like I don't know how to have a normal relationship with them, I admitted. Like there's this script I'm supposed to follow, but I don't know what happens if I stop following it. Maybe it's time to find out, David suggested gently. That weekend, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I called Isabella and asked if we could meet for coffee to talk about wedding planning and our relationship in general. She agreed immediately, sounding pleased that I was finally ready to engage with her celebration. We met at a small cafe near her apartment, a place we'd been coming to since college for important conversations and sister bonding. Isabella arrived looking radiant and excited, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically about venue possibilities and dress designers. I'm so glad you finally have time to focus on the wedding, she said happily as we settled into our usual corner table. I've been dying to get your input on everything. You're so practical and organized, and I really need someone to help me think through all the logistics. The compliment was typical Isabella, managing to praise me while simultaneously reducing my value to practical assistance rather than creative input or emotional support. Isabella, I need to talk to you about something before we discuss wedding plans, I said carefully. Of course, she replied, though I could see a flicker of concern cross her face. What's on your mind? I need you to understand how I felt about what happened at my wedding reception, I began, my heart pounding with nervous energy. When Mom announced your engagement during my reception. Isabella's expression shifted to one of confusion, mixed with slight defensiveness. What do you mean? I thought you were happy for me. I am happy for you, I said quickly. I'm thrilled that you and Marcus are engaged. But the timing of the announcement was really difficult for me. The timing? Isabella repeated, her tone suggesting she genuinely didn't understand what I was getting at. Isabella, you got engaged at my wedding and Mom announced it during my reception, I explained as gently as I could. It turned my wedding celebration into a celebration of your engagement too. For a moment, Isabella just stared at me with what appeared to be genuine bewilderment. Then her expression cleared, and she let out a small laugh that sounded nervous rather than amused. "Oh, Sarah, you're not upset about that, are you?" she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that felt condescending rather than comforting. The timing was just so magical and romantic. Marcus had been planning it for weeks, and he didn't know about your wedding when he picked the date. "But you knew about my wedding," I pointed out. "And you could have asked Mom not to announce it that night." "I was just so excited," Isabella said, her voice taking on the slightly whiny quality it always acquired when she felt criticized. "And everyone was already dressed up and celebrating love. It seemed like the perfect moment to share our news." "It was my moment," I said quietly, feeling the familiar exhaustion that came with trying to explain my perspective to someone who seemed incapable of understanding it. "It was supposed to be my day." "Sarah, you're being really unfair," Isabella said, her tone turning defensive. "My engagement doesn't take anything away from your marriage. There's enough happiness to go around." The phrase sounded like something our mother might say, and I wondered if they'd discussed my reaction to the wedding situation. The idea that my hurt feelings were a topic of conversation between them, analyzed and dismissed as unreasonable, made me feel even more isolated. "I'm not saying your engagement takes away from my marriage," I clarified. "I'm saying that announcing it at my wedding reception took away from my wedding reception." "That's really petty," Isabella said, her voice turning cold in a way that was unusual for her. "I never thought you were the type of person to be jealous of other people's happiness." The accusation of jealousy stung because it was so far from the truth and yet so familiar from our childhood. Whenever I'd expressed frustration about Isabella receiving more attention or praise, the response had always been that I was jealous, rather than that there might be a legitimate imbalance in how we were treated. "I'm not jealous of your happiness," I said, working to keep my voice steady. "I'm hurt that my wedding became about your engagement." "Well, I'm hurt that you can't be happy for me," Isabella shot back. "I thought my own sister would be more supportive of the most important moment of my life." The conversation was spiraling in exactly the direction I'd feared it would, with my attempt to express my feelings being reframed as an attack on Isabella's happiness. But I'd come too far to back down now. "I am supportive of you," I said firmly, "but I also need you to understand that your timing hurt me, and I need some space to process that before I can dive into helping plan your wedding." "Space?" Isabella repeated the word like it was foreign to her. "What kind of space?" "I need some time to work through my feelings before I can be genuinely excited about wedding planning," I explained. "I don't want to help plan your wedding while I'm still feeling hurt and resentful. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." Isabella stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing this information with obvious difficulty. In our family, emotional processing typically happened privately, if at all. The idea of taking time to work through feelings before engaging in family obligations was apparently a foreign concept. "So you're punishing me," she said finally, her voice small and hurt. "You're withholding your support because you're mad about something that can't be changed." "I'm not punishing you," I replied gently. "I'm trying to be honest about where I am emotionally so that I can eventually be the sister you deserve." "The sister I deserve would be excited about my wedding," Isabella said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "The sister I deserve would want to help me plan the most important day of my life." Her tears were genuine, and they tugged at my heart in the way they always had. Isabella had never been manipulative with her emotions, just genuinely confused and hurt when things didn't go the way she expected them to. But I was beginning to understand that her expectations had been shaped by a lifetime of other people accommodating her needs. Without question. "Isabella, I do want to help you," I said softly. "But I need you to acknowledge that what happened at my wedding was hurtful so that we can move forward." "I can't acknowledge something I don't believe," she replied stubbornly. "I think you're overreacting, and I think you're being unfair to me and to Mom." The conversation ended in a stalemate, with neither of us willing to budge from our positions. Isabella left the cafe in tears, and I sat alone with my untouched latte, feeling simultaneously guilty and relieved. I'd finally spoken my truth, even though it hadn't been received the way I'd hoped. That evening, my phone rang repeatedly with calls from my mother, which I let go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the messages, they traced a clear emotional arc from concern to frustration to anger. "Sarah, Isabella called me very upset about your conversation today. Call me back so we can discuss this situation rationally." "Sarah, it's Mom again. I'm disappointed that you're putting Isabella through this emotional turmoil over something so trivial. This isn't like you. Sarah, if you don't call me back tonight, I'm coming over tomorrow. This family drama needs to stop immediately." The escalation was typical of how my family handled conflict, with any disruption to the established order treated as a crisis that needed immediate resolution. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel compelled to rush in and smooth things over. David found me listening to the messages with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Let me guess," he said. "You're being unreasonable, and you need to apologize immediately to restore family harmony." "How did you know?" I asked with a rueful laugh. "Because I've been watching this dynamic for 3 years," he replied, settling beside me on the couch. "Your family has trained you to believe that your feelings don't matter as much as keeping everyone else comfortable." His observation was painfully accurate. I'd spent so many years prioritizing family peace over my own emotional needs that I'd forgotten I had a right to express hurt feelings without immediately being expected to get over them. "What if they're right?" I asked quietly. "What if I am being petty and unreasonable?" "Sarah," David said firmly, turning to face me directly. "What if they're wrong? What if your feelings are completely valid, and they're just uncomfortable with being called out on their behavior?" It was a perspective I'd never really considered before. I'd been so conditioned to assume that my family's reactions were the measure of whether my feelings were justified, that it had never occurred to me that their discomfort might be the real problem. "I don't know how to not care what they think," I admitted. "You don't have to stop caring," David replied gently, "but you can stop letting their opinions be the only ones that matter." That night, I lay awake thinking about the patterns that had shaped my family relationships for as long as I could remember. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my feelings to avoid conflict, all the occasions when Isabella's needs had taken precedence over mine, all the moments when I'd been expected to be understanding and accommodating, while others were allowed to be demanding and inflexible. The next morning, my mother called again, and this time I answered. "Sarah, thank goodness," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We need to talk about this situation with Isabella. She's absolutely heartbroken." "I'm sorry she's upset," I said sincerely. "That wasn't my intention." "Then why did you say those hurtful things to her?" Mom demanded. "Why are you making such a big deal out of nothing?" "It's not nothing to me," I replied quietly. "And I need you and Isabella to understand that before we can move forward." "Sarah, you're being incredibly selfish," Mom said, her voice sharp with frustration. "Isabella is planning her wedding, one of the most stressful and important events of her life, and you're choosing this moment to create family drama over ancient history." "It happened 3 weeks ago," I pointed out. "And it's not ancient history to me." "You need to get over it," Mom said bluntly. "You need to apologize to your sister and start acting like a supportive family member instead of a spoiled child." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with my mother alternating between anger, guilt trips, and attempts at emotional manipulation. But for the first time in my life, none of it was working. I'd finally reached a point where my own emotional well-being mattered more than maintaining the illusion of family harmony. "I'm not going to apologize for having feelings," I said finally. "And I'm not going to pretend that what happened at my wedding was okay just to make everyone else more comfortable." "Then you're choosing to destroy this family," Mom replied dramatically. "You're choosing your pride over your relationships with the people who love you most." "I'm choosing to have relationships based on mutual respect instead of one-sided accommodation," I corrected. "If that destroys the family, then maybe the family needed to be destroyed." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise my mother. I'd never spoken so directly about family dynamics before, never challenged the fundamental assumptions that governed our relationships. "I can't believe what you're saying," Mom said, her voice filled with shock and hurt. "This isn't the daughter I raised." "Maybe it's the daughter you should have raised," I replied quietly, and ended the call. In the days that followed, my family's reaction was swift and predictable. Isabella sent me a long, tearful text message about how I was ruining her engagement period and making everything about myself. My father called to express concern about the situation and encouraged me to work things out with my mother and sister. Even my Aunt Margaret reached out to suggest that I was being unnecessarily difficult during what should be a happy time for the family. The unified response was both hurtful and illuminating. It showed me how quickly my family could mobilize to pressure me back into my designated role when I stepped out of line. But it also showed me that my worth to them was primarily measured by my willingness to accommodate others rather than by my own needs or feelings. David was incredible throughout this period, offering support without trying to tell me what to do. He listened when I needed to vent, held me when I cried, and consistently reminded me that I deserved better treatment from the people who claimed to love me. "I keep waiting for them to apologize," I told him one evening as we walked through our neighborhood. "I keep thinking that if I just hold out long enough, they'll realize that what they did was wrong and they'll want to make it right." "And what if they don't?" David asked gently. "Then I guess I'll know where I really stand with them," I replied, the truth of it settling into my bones with surprising clarity. It was during this period of family estrangement that I began to understand something crucial about relationships and self-worth. I'd spent so many years trying to earn my family's respect and appreciation by being the perfect accommodating daughter that I'd never considered whether their respect was actually worth having if it required me to suppress my own needs and feelings. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying. If I didn't define myself by my family's approval, then who was I? If I didn't find my worth in being the supportive sister and dutiful daughter, then what gave my life meaning? The answers came gradually, through small moments of self-discovery that felt revolutionary after years of living according to other people's expectations. I started saying no to social commitments that didn't interest me instead of attending out of obligation. I began expressing my opinions more freely at work, even when they differed from my colleagues' views. I started prioritizing my own emotional needs instead of constantly managing other people's feelings. The changes were subtle but profound, and David noticed them immediately. "You seem different," he observed one evening as we cooked dinner together. "More confident, maybe? More yourself?" "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm finally figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be who everyone else wants me to be." "And who is that?" David asked with genuine curiosity. I considered the question carefully, thinking about all the small revelations I'd had over the past few weeks. "Someone who deserves to have her feelings respected," I said finally. "Someone who doesn't have to earn love by being perfect. Someone who gets to be the main character in her own story." It was a simple realization, but it felt revolutionary after spending 28 years believing that my value lay in supporting others, rather than in being worthy of support myself. 3 weeks after our conversation at the cafe, Isabella called me. I almost didn't answer, expecting another tearful guilt trip or angry demand that I apologize for hurting her feelings. But something in the way the phone rang, persistent but not frantic, made me pick up. "Sarah?" Isabella's voice was quiet, uncertain in a way that was unusual for her. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I replied, settling into the chair by our living room window. "I've been thinking about what you said," Isabella began slowly, "about how you felt at your wedding. And I talked to Marcus about it, and he helped me see some things differently." This was not the conversation I'd been expecting, and I felt a flicker of hope mixed with caution. "What did he help you see?" I asked gently. "He asked me how I would feel if someone announced their engagement at our wedding," Isabella said quietly. "And when I really thought about it, I realized I would be devastated." The admission hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. For the first time since the wedding, Isabella was acknowledging that my perspective had validity. "I think I was so caught up in my own excitement that I didn't really think about how it would affect you," she continued. "And when you tried to tell me, I got defensive instead of listening." "Thank you for saying that," I said softly, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "It means a lot to me." "I'm sorry," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm really truly sorry that my engagement announcement overshadowed your wedding. You deserve to have that day be completely yours, and I took that away from you. The apology was everything I'd been hoping for and more." It was specific, it acknowledged the impact of her actions, and it didn't include any justifications or excuses. "I forgive you," I said immediately, meaning it completely. "And I'm sorry I wasn't able to be more gracious about it at the time." "You don't need to apologize for having feelings," Isabella said, echoing the words I'd spoken to our mother. "You had every right to be upset." We talked for another hour, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. Isabella shared her own struggles with feeling pressure to live up to family expectations, and I opened up about how difficult it had been to always feel like the less important sister. It wasn't a complete resolution of all our relationship issues, but it was a genuine beginning. "I know this doesn't fix everything," Isabella said as our conversation wound down. "And I know you might not be ready to help with wedding planning yet. But I want you to know that whenever you are ready, I'd love to have your input. Not because you're practical and organized, but because you're my sister and your opinion matters to me." The distinction was subtle but significant, and it showed me that Isabella was beginning to understand the difference between valuing someone for what they could do versus valuing them for who they were. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of our living room, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The conversation with Isabella hadn't solved all our family's problems, but it had shown me that change was possible when people were willing to listen and acknowledge each other's perspectives. David came home from work to find me smiling for the first time in days. "Good day?" he asked, kissing me hello. Isabella apologized, I said simply. "Really?" David's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "A real apology? Or a sorry you feel that way, non-apology?" "A real one," I confirmed. She acknowledged that what happened was wrong, and that my feelings were valid. "How do you feel about it?" David asked, settling beside me on the couch. "Hopeful," I said after thinking about it. "Like maybe we can actually have a different kind of relationship if we're both willing to work at it." The conversation with Isabella marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful transformation in our family dynamics. It wasn't immediate or complete, but it was genuine progress toward relationships based on mutual respect, rather than established hierarchies and unexamined assumptions. My mother took longer to come around, but eventually she too began to acknowledge that her handling of the wedding situation had been problematic. The process was gradual and sometimes frustrating, but it was happening. More importantly, I was learning to value my own perspective and emotional needs, regardless of whether my family validated them. The approval I'd spent my life seeking was finally coming from within, and that made all the difference in how I moved through the world. I was still Sarah Chen Morrison, still a teacher and a wife and a daughter and a sister. But now I was also someone who knew her own worth, someone who refused to be diminished by other people's inability to see her value. And that transformation was worth every difficult conversation and uncomfortable moment it had taken to achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.